Welcome back. In my last video on Doctor Who, we kicked off our coverage of Ncuti Gatwa's era as the titular Time Lord by reviewing the 60th anniversary specials that aired in 2023. I highly recommend having watched that video first before this, as many of the plotlines and characters discussed are established there, but I'm sure you could also be fine not doing that if you've seen the episodes. Without further ado, take heed of spoilers and let's begin. And so we are off with the proper start to the new era, the 15th Doctor's first solo story, The Church on Ruby Road. Now, as a disclaimer, I do tend to rate Christmas specials higher than they probably deserve, because these episodes are not intended to be viewed as regular outings. The intended way to watch them is on the couch on Christmas Day, exhausted and full with family around you chatting and making merry. And as a result, they tend to be simpler, more whimsical adventures that I think deserve a gentler critique. The Church on Ruby Road introduces us to Season 1's companion, Ruby Sunday, who was abandoned by her biological mother on the steps of the titular church on Christmas Eve 2004. This is all you will need to know about Ruby going forward. The primary monster of the week sci-fi plot revolves around a group of time-traveling, baby-eating goblins who are attracted to the power of coincidence and who have set their sights on Ruby's foster mother Carla's newly fostered baby, Lulubelle. The goblins have been traveling up and down Ruby's timeline, creating bad luck, weaving what the Doctor later calls a chance of coincidence, in an effort to make the act of eating Lulubelle more fulfilling. However, it is not only the goblins who appear to be following Ruby, as the Doctor also appears to have taken an interest in the strange goings-on, first being spotted in the club where he divides his time between dancing and glowering malevolently. He's literally me at the function. As an aside, Gatwa has a scene after leaving the club with a policeman that perfectly establishes who the Doctor really is at his core. Friendly yet mysterious, comforting and intriguing. Everything about his delivery and performance is so invigorating and fresh while still retaining echoes of everyone the Doctor has been. The goblins also take some time to stalk, maim, and ultimately murder British television presenter Davina McCall, because fuck Davina McCall, I guess. The goblins kidnap Lulubelle and take her to their ship, where the Doctor and Ruby finally properly meet, and allow me to say that this pair is electric. Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson have such good chemistry together, and the way that they bounce off of each other is at a level of being both natural and fun that more than adequately follows up a return to the pairing of David Tennant and Catherine Tate. Inside the Goblin ship is really where we get to see these characters shine, how they respond to situations that threaten their understanding of the universe. And because of the Christmas special format, it never feels like it becomes too self-serious or heavy too quickly, a problem that can plague newly regenerated Doctors trying to establish themselves. This entire scene of the Doctor and Ruby trying to escape their bindings and rescue Lulubelle is so tightly written that even though the Doctor never stops to flatly deliver exposition, by the end of it you feel as if you fully understand what these goblins do. In the ship, we witness the first of this era's musical moments, with the goblins singing a song about eating babies. For the sake of not repeating myself, I'm going to save my thoughts on the era's musicality for the music-centered episode The Devil's Chord, and get it all out there. For now, suffice it to say that the Doctor freestyling on the goblins' song as a method of distracting them from his escape attempt is such an innately Doctor-y thing to do that I'm honestly shocked it took 40 seasons to get to this point. After they escape, the number of coincidences only grows, until the goblins go back in time to the night that Ruby was abandoned to eat her. And we see the effect of this, how different Carla and her mother Cherry's lives are without Ruby, and how much she meant to them, leaving the Doctor alone to face off against the goblins, ultimately skewering the Goblin King on the church spire, which I thought was surprisingly violent for a Christmas episode. Hope you wanted impaling for Christmas, little Timmy. But it's here that the Doctor sees Ruby being abandoned, but is unable to see her mother's face because she's dressed like the newest member of Organization 13. The day is saved, and the episode concludes with Ruby realizing in a fun and energetic scene that the Doctor must be a time traveler, and finally entering the TARDIS. Oh, and also the Doctor saves Davina McCall from her untimely demise at the Goblin's hands, because yay Davina McCall. As you might have noticed, these goblins do not function on the same rules that the average Doctor Who Monster of the Week is beholden to, and the reasoning given for this is that they are part of the Toymaker's legions, their existence a direct result of the previously mentioned eclipse event in Wild Blue Yonder. Family is a big theme in this special and throughout the era as a whole, and it is through this theme that Russell T Davies chooses to lightly explore the Chibnall era idea of the timeless child, the concept that the Doctor was in fact not a native Time Lord, but instead a mysterious foundling who was cruelly tortured and experimented on so that the Time Lords could steal the ability to regenerate. During the Chibnall era, this idea was a mess. Instead of giving the concept an emotional core and emphasizing that, Chibnall chose to instead tie it completely to continuity and the lore. Instead of giving us a chance to get to feel how the Doctor feels about this revelation, we were instead given remember the Morbius Doctors, remember the Fugitive Doctor, remember the Other, remember Arsalan, remember Andrew Cartmel, remember Lungbarrow, remember the Celestial Intervention Agency? Gallifrey's gone again, and here's the Master, he's real upset. Oh no, the Doctor's adoptive mother wants to destroy the universe. Now come on guys, let's go. What Davies does to salvage this concept is rather simply just ignoring all of the continuity angle because most people don't give two shits about that, and instead just focusing on one clear aspect. The Doctor has no family. Except his granddaughter, I guess, but she hasn't counted since 1983. This ties into previously explored ideas regarding the people the Doctor leaves behind. Sarah Jane Smith even said to the Doctor all the way back in 2008's Journey's End, "You've got the biggest family in the world," a sentiment that the Doctor repeats verbatim to Ruby in this episode. The Doctor, like Ruby, was abandoned and found. This theme of family, whether biology really determines who you are, nature versus nurture, runs throughout this era, so I will naturally save my complete thoughts for it later, but it is definitely something that we will continue to draw attention to just because it is so prominent. In addition to this family theme is the reintroduction of the idea that the Doctor makes his companions' lives worse. He wonders aloud to Ruby's neighbour Mrs. Flood about whether he himself is the bad luck that plagues those he travels with. I say reintroduction because this idea is certainly not new to Doctor Who. Basically, since the revival began, the show has made it clear that while their companions wouldn't give up their adventures for anything, the Doctor tends to consider it to have all gone wrong by the tragic end.
Who was she?
I don't know, but she was very brave.
They're always brave.
Now, the science fiction aspect of the family theme discussed earlier is the mystery of Ruby's mother. Why did she abandon Ruby? Who is she? Why was she dressed like Prince Charming in Shrek the Third? Why couldn't Davina McCall find her on any database? How did she not notice the massive goblin ship trying to eat her baby? This mystery will only grow as the season continues, but I still, even after having seen the finale, find this beginning incredibly intriguing. The mystery is set up so elegantly that just like the goblins using their accidents to weave Ruby into their web of coincidence, it weaves you into its web emotionally. You want the payoff of who Ruby's mother is. Another mystery set up in this episode is the mystery of Mrs. Flood, Ruby's next-door neighbor who is seen briefly at the beginning complaining about the mysterious blue box in the street and giving out quite aggressively to another local. But then at the end of the episode, after the Doctor has changed time and come back, she is not only amicable and friendly towards that same neighbor, but even looks directly into the camera as the TARDIS disappears and asks if we've never seen a TARDIS before, leaving some great mystery as to who she is and why she changed. A mystery for the next season, however. Yet another storyline set up, albeit far more subtly, is the recurrence of the actress Susan Twist, who appeared as Isaac Newton's maid, Mrs. Merridew, in Wild Blue Yonder, and appears here making a request to Ruby's band. Who is she? Why does she reappear multiple centuries apart? Russell T Davies sure loves his mysterious old women, doesn't he? So for a final storyline countdown, we have number 1, who is Ruby's mother? Number 2, the Toymaker warned us of the one who waits. Who is that? Number 3, who are the Susan Twists? Number 4, Who is Mrs. Flood? Number 5. Who picked up the toymaker's tooth containing the master? And number 6. Who is the Meep's boss? Not all of these will be answered this season, thankfully, but it is certainly a hefty checklist of questions, and one that will only grow before we hit the finale. All in all, I think this Christmas special does a remarkable amount of heavy lifting in terms of setting up the new status quo, giving us our first 15th Doctor solo adventure, our new companion, new threats, new tone, new themes, and it does it all without ever feeling like it misses a beat or overstays its welcome. It carries on the ideas of the Giggle and Wild Blue Yonder without necessarily feeling like one needs to have known them in advance. I consider this episode to be a very good introduction to Doctor Who, but only for someone interested in starting with the current era, which is fine because that's how it's been designed. Davies' writing and Gibson and Gatwa's performances are fully on point here, and it all serves to deliver a delightful Doctor Who Christmas experience. As for a rating, given everything this episode does well and without any real major negative points, I'm going to give it a solid 7 out of 10, placing it below the Giggle and above the Star Beast. The Church on Ruby Road is a good episode of Doctor Who, and there is something to be said for low ambitions but good execution. I think it's time for us to move on now. Okay, no extra Doctor, no Christmas special, no anniversary nonsense. Finally, we have reached the first normal episode of Doctor Who to have been released since Series 13's The Vanquishers all the way back in December of 2021. So, how is it? Well, the answer to that question is, as ever, not simple. Space Baby's closest relative within the world of Doctor Who television stories is the 2005 two-parter Aliens of London and World War III, which bafflingly chose to use the medium of farting alien body snatchers to satirize the brutal injustices of the imperialist invasion of Iraq. Similar to that story, here Davies has chosen to use the medium of talking babies to confront the issue of reproductive rights. Let's get into it. After a frenetic, almost addictively energetic opening between the Doctor and Ruby, including a very funny, blatantly show-offy and expensive joke about the butterfly effect, not a bad thing, if you got it, flaunt it, the Doctor and Ruby crash land into a mysterious space station, housing a monster that terrorizes the crew being the titular Space Babies, and I hope you find that phrase funny, because let me tell you, Russell T Davies certainly must have, since it is said no fewer than 14 times in this episode. The Doctor and Ruby quickly bond with the Space Babies and soon discover the reason behind the space station being abandoned and the true nature of the monstrous bogeyman. The positives of this episode are shallow enough that they are clear to see on its face. Ncuti Gatwa is perfectly cast as the new era's Doctor. The incredible chemistry between Gatwa and Millie Gibson serves to elevate the material into a fun, if only okay, episode of Doctor Who. From minute one, the energy of this pair carries us from scene to scene with such a sense of joy and wonder that is only increased by the occasionally fantastic writing. For example, the scene where the Doctor explains to Ruby why he travels, why he chases that sense of freedom even through the struggle and loss, why he chooses to take companions with him, which of course mirrors a similar scene from 2005's The End of the World, which was also that Doctor's second episode with a 19-year-old blonde companion, but once again, I am digressing. With the cast of this episode being dominated by babies, yes, space babies, the bulk of the episode's emotional weight is left entirely down to Gatwa and Gibson, and I think it is safe to say that they absolutely rise to the challenge. The negatives of this episode, sadly, are also quite easy to see. The Space Babies' CGI mouths are uncanny and gross to look at, though I genuinely don't know if there's a way that could have been improved. Additionally, there's this thread left hanging through the episode of the Doctor repeating the words "push the button," even being central to the climactic moments of the story, but this thread has no origin, as the initial scene where it was introduced, where the Doctor and Ruby would have been seen dancing to the Sugar Babes' "Push the Button" playing on the TARDIS jukebox, was cut for time, leaving a strange ghost of a running joke haunting the episode. There is also the possible negative that we'll discuss in a bit of tying so many serious adult themes into an episode that contains a spaceship farting its way towards a distant planet as part of its epilogue. This episode practically exists for the sake of its ties into the theme of lost families. One of the first things we hear in this episode is the Doctor announcing that his planet Gallifrey is gone, even calling it a genocide, leaving him once again with no family. This new language to describe the destruction of Gallifrey, choosing to name it as a genocide and actively showing the impact of it on the Doctor emotionally, does wonders for the audience to be able to empathize with the tragedy by tying it to actual real feelings of actual real people, leaving the Doctor once again without a family in the universe. Not to mention it helps it to feel a bit distinct from the last time we did the whole Last of the Time Lords tango. Although it does come with the strange consequence that now that you've placed that crime of genocide onto the Master's shoulders, how can you use that character again without erasing the friendly rivalry that exists between them and the Doctor? Of course, the Master has killed before, but I think it's fair to say that there's a difference between a murder and a genocide. Regardless, the Master is in a tooth, it doesn't matter. And just like the Doctor, just like Ruby, the space babies have been abandoned, with the Doctor instantly recognizing this connection and using it to bond with Captain Poppy, leading to an incredibly sweet, compassionate, and doctor-y scene where he reassures Poppy that no one grows up wrong. A scene which shows off the new Doctor's willingness to openly engage in these complex emotions. The family theme even carries through to the end when the Doctor chooses to spend Christmas with Ruby's family, tying everything up in a nice bow. The reason the space babies have been abandoned turns out to be because of a recession on their home planet of Pacifico del Rio, leading to this baby farm being deserted in order for the company to save money. However, it is illegal to shut down the birth machines themselves, so in Ruby's words, they won't stop the space babies being born, but they refuse to look after them, which is a fairly obvious reference to the current debates and legal restrictions on a pregnant person's right to choose, where in many places people are being forced to carry fetuses to term by their government, only for said government to provide no assistance in the postnatal survival of those same babies whose right to life they apparently care so much about. This idea is even central to the climax when it is revealed that the bogeyman is in itself a creation of the birth machines, born from the space babies' bogies, leading the Doctor to protect it from being expelled through the airlock, as it has as much of a right to life as the other space babies. In addition to this abortion parallel, we also have a fairly explicit reference to the status of refugees, as the Doctor proposes bringing the space babies to the nearby planet of Mondo Karun, only to be told that the space station has no engines, and you've got to physically turn up on someone else's shore to be a refugee. I take no issue with how these political messages are placed in the episode, but similar to the situation of the invasion of Iraq in Aliens of London, I do have to wonder if juxtaposing these very serious issues that cause real pain and suffering to real people's lives with juvenile humor about farts and bogies is the right way to go. This episode also builds on the mystery of Ruby's mother and the night she was abandoned, as around halfway through, Ruby remembers that night and it causes snow to begin to fall indoors in a spaceship outside of any atmosphere. In addition to the Doctor's recollection of that night changing, now instead of Ruby's mother simply walking away from him, she now dramatically turns and points, almost in an accusatory way. Not only is the identity of Ruby's mother a complete mystery, but now this memory of her birth contains the power in itself to change and to cause snow to physically fall. This leads the Doctor to surreptitiously conduct a TARDIS scan of Ruby's DNA, and as he leaves the TARDIS in the episode's final moments, we see snow begin to fall as the scan completes. This extra layer pretty definitively ties the identity of Ruby's mother into some supernatural science fiction-y force, leaving an avenue open for any number of possible resolutions. This added mystery also makes it far more understandable when the Doctor later flatly denies to bring Ruby back to that night. After all, he only went to that night once, and things are already beginning to unravel. Who knows what else could happen should he visit again? In conclusion, Space Babies is an aggressively okay episode of Doctor Who. attempting to weave very sensitive topics in with a very juvenile sense of humor in a way that I think does more to give one emotional whiplash than really inspire any serious discussion. The energy and chemistry between our two main characters does most of the heavy lifting in terms of making this episode enjoyable, and it's for these simple reasons that I feel justified in giving Space Babies a 6 out of 10, currently at the bottom of our ranking. I mean, at the very least, it's still the best Doctor Who episode to tackle the discussion of abortion, so that's something. Premiering the same day as Space Babies, The Devil's Chord was something of a headliner for this series, with much of the marketing focusing around the idea that Doctor Who was finally doing a Beatles episode. To get ahead of that one guy who is already furiously typing a comment, I am aware that a clip of the Beatles on Top of the Pops was played in the 1965 story The Chase. So now that I've said that, please go outside, your family misses you. This episode notably also features the second of Doctor Who's new Gods of Chaos, starring Jinx Monsoon as Maestro, the god of music. In addition to this, The Devil's Chord is another episode made in the image of the giggle, taking bold new steps in a direction to fully embrace the concept of a supernatural god manipulating reality. How do these steps fare? Let's discuss. First, let us talk about the most obvious positive aspect of this episode, which is the direction. This episode is spectacularly directed, a real treat to look at, and the way Ben Chessel's directing complements the incredible Murray Gold score really does produce some truly beautiful scenes, most notably the gorgeous scene of Ruby playing the piano, where the power of music is shown to draw people in and move them emotionally, but also in smaller ways, such as the scene where the Doctor and Paul McCartney discuss the potential of music, and the score matches up to the notes that Paul describes haunting his dreams in a world without music. Not to mention the final scene of the episode where the Doctor and Ruby play the piano on the crossing at Abbey Road. In addition to these, there are obviously the performances. At this point it should be a given that Gatwa and Gibson are giving strong performances, but Jinx Monsoon, the episode's guest star, is not one to be overlooked. The level of camp and threat that Monsoon brings to the role of Maestro perfectly suits the character's status as the child of the Toymaker, drawing a consistent thread of behavior between the two characters while still cementing Maestro as their own distinct entity, fearsome in their own way. The hunger that Maestro possesses, the urge to take and consume all music in the world, is portrayed perfectly and establishes the character as an instantly memorable foe for Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor. We also see a return to our rules for the Gods of Chaos here, where Maestro is both summoned and defeated by the discovery of a magical chord. Maestro's domain lingers, triggering a big musical sequence similar to the Toymaker's domain lingering, allowing for a prize to be taken, and adding a new facet that the gods bring with them, harbingers, to herald their arrival, in this case a young boy named Henry Arbinger, who interestingly persists after Maestro's banishment, suggesting a return for either of the characters in the future. This episode also furthers the theme of lost family in a major way by introducing the mysterious song in Ruby's heart, Carol of the Bells, representing the day of Ruby's abandonment, and even giving us a nugget of mystery with Maestro being visibly unnerved by the oldest one having been present on that day, whoever that could be. Not only does it advance the theme of lost family and the mystery of Ruby's parentage in that way, though, but also by explicitly calling out the Doctor's granddaughter Susan by name for the first time since the show was revived in 2005. When you are focusing the themes of your series around abandonment and families, of course you would want to tie that back to the first time a companion was left behind, the day the first Doctor left his granddaughter on the Earth of the future. The episode also gives an explicit method for the most recent Time Lord genocide, calling it out as a genetic explosion that swept the universe, which isn't important now, but keep it in mind. Unfortunately, as good as the performance, directing, and music are, they are all simultaneously let down, as I feel that the script for The Devil's Chord is one of the weakest of this new era. For example, this is an episode ostensibly all about music and celebrating its impact on people, and yet nearly every musical term described in it is used incorrectly or just in a strange way where it's only technically true. Apart from the admittedly very funny diegesis joke, the episode seems more like it's taking on the aesthetics of being about music without actually having any knowledge to engage with it on a real level. The best moments in this episode that feel like real celebrations of music are the ones where no one is talking, and the direction and the score are allowed more room to breathe, and one can really sit in the feeling of being swept up by the sound. In addition to this, there has apparently been a 6-month time skip between Space Babies and this episode, which I will remind you, both aired on the same night. And the Doctor and Ruby's relationship has become far more familiar than we as an audience are prepared for. We don't really feel like we fully know these people yet, but you still have Ruby saying things like "you never hide," when last episode it was a major plot point that the Doctor ran and hid from the bogeyman. And sure, maybe in those 6 months there were loads of adventures where the Doctor didn't hide and instead faced danger head on. But when as an audience this information is contradicted by something you saw happen on literally the same day that you are watching this episode, it creates a disconnect where the place that the characters are in their relationship is not reflected in how much we've gotten to know them. And one could go as far as to say that this is a natural extension of choices like depriving the 15th Doctor of a post-regeneration haze that we see in other Doctors, such as in the 11th Hour and Deep Breath, where it seems like the goal is to speedrun getting to a new status quo of a Doctor going on adventures with their best friend. But you can't do that without harming the connection the audience has to those characters. And as we'll see, this decision is going to haunt the rest of the season. We will see multiple episodes where the Doctor and Ruby are not together or have limited roles, which does not even allow us to get to know them as a unit now that they have bonded so much. In summary, The Devil's Chord is a very strange episode that has many interesting and admirable ideas within it about music and family, and the ways people connect to each other, but it is let down on these fronts by a script that is simply not equipped to deal with these topics. As a result of this, while I enjoy much of this episode, I can only feel comfortable giving it a 6 out of 10, placing it above Space Babies and below the Star Beast, as while it does not create tonal dissonance with its themes like Space Babies does, a lack of understanding of its core subject creates a similar effect that prevents it from reaching the heights of something like Wild Blue Yonder, or even The Giggle. Also time for that brief music discussion I mentioned earlier. Just do a musical episode. It's been 62 years at this point, and doing this sort of halfway thing where you have one musical number in an episode is already pissing off the people who get pissed off by musical episodes. As the one guy on the planet who enjoys musical episodes, I think it's insane that we've gone 62 years and 41 seasons without there having been a planet where the atmosphere makes everyone sing. It's crazy. Just do it. Who would care? Just do it for me, please, Russell. Boom marks the most exciting time of this season for an insufferable 12th Doctor fan like myself. The return of Big Stevie Moffat to writing Doctor Who with his first episode since Twice Upon a Time, all the way back in December of 2017. For the sake of announcing my biases up front, I believe that Stephen Moffat is the best showrunner Doctor Who has ever had. I think his run gave us some of the most complex characters in the history of the show. I think that Clara's arc from Series 7 to Series 9 is an unparalleled piece of television writing. And most of all, I think that he just gets what Doctor Who is better than any other writer, certainly of the revival era at least. With all of that said, it probably doesn't surprise you to hear that I think Boom is by far the greatest episode of this season. Boom is an unmistakably Stephen Moffat episode, even outside of the obvious inclusions such as the Anglican Marines first seen in The Time of Angels, and Villain Guard, a weapons company first mentioned in The Doctor Dances all the way back in 2005. You know the drill at this point, let's discuss. Boom's premise is one of those concepts that instantly sets your mind racing as to the character exploration that is made possible through an idea as simple as the Doctor is stuck on a landmine, unable to move without being exploded to death. In practice, Boom works as an interesting companion piece to the 2011 Christmas special The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, in that episode was explicitly telling a story about the power of mothers, where an alien ship will only recognize a mother as being strong enough to pilot it. In the same vein, Boom seeks to tell a mirrored story, a story about fatherhood and deceased loved ones, even down to a major character's surname being the German word for father. The Doctor relates to the AI hologram of the deceased John Francis Vater through the shared experience of fatherhood, even ending the episode with the words of Philip Larkin, "What survives of us is love." This theme runs straight through the episode as the AI hologram of John Vater seeks to have his remains returned to his young daughter Splice, and it nicely intersects with the running themes through the era of abandonment and lost families, showing that for John Vater he cannot even abandon his daughter in death, a stark contrast to what we know so far of Ruby's mother, who, judging by her outfit, left Ruby to go and join the Fellowship of the Ring. Speaking of those running themes, once again the mystery of Ruby's parentage is made relevant, as after Ruby is shot by Canterbury and the ambulance tries to discover her next of kin, it reveals it cannot find anyone, and snow begins to fall, further adding to this mystery but bringing us no closer to solving it. In addition to the themes of family, it just wouldn't be a Stephen Moffat episode if there weren't blatant anti-capitalist messages in there. In this episode, the automated ambulances roam around the battlefield mercy-killing injured Anglican Marines, for example killing John Francis Vater because he has been blinded. But throughout the episode there is no actual sign of the enemy that the Marines have been fighting. That is until the climax, where the Doctor reveals that in fact there has never been an enemy, the planet is uninhabited. The Villengard Corporation has trapped the Marines in an endless and endlessly profitable cycle of being injured by their own weapons, such as the landmines, and dying, which calls for more Marines, which calls for more weapons to be bought from Villengard, with the ambulances there to make sure the death toll never falls too low, and to euthanize anyone who is no longer in peak physical condition. In our modern world, where all pretense of war being a righteous conflict of good and evil has been abandoned in favor of everyone just kind of accepting that war is a profitable business, this episode serves as a dark science fiction reflection of our apathy towards the conflicts of today. What makes this message work for me is the timelessness of it. Obviously, Boom is set in the far future, but it is not explicitly about one particular conflict, like for example Aliens of London and World War III was about the invasion of Iraq, so where that episode's focus on the cruel, profit-oriented motives of that conflict can be dismissed because the invasion is over now, we can all forget about it, Boom will always ask its viewers to think about the wars that their governments are involved in. It will always ask if the profit is worth the death. As usual, the performances here are superb. Gatwa's outburst to convince Mundy Flynn that all her fighting has been for nothing is a stellar piece of acting that shows for the first time the true range this man has as the Doctor, bringing to mind the climax of Oxygen with Peter Capaldi. And throughout, Gatwa excels at conveying the panicking Doctor's attempts to keep himself calm, lest his adrenaline set off the landmine. While Ruby spends much of the episode unconscious, the moments that she does have are some of her most engaging of the season, defying the Doctor's directions, actively going against him because she believes that she is right and he will not explode, intersecting with another of the episode's themes, faith. In addition, the episode's side characters excel at their respective roles with believable performances, especially Varada Sethu of Andor fame as Mundy Flynn, who I'm sure will have absolutely no relevance to Doctor Who again going forward. The direction is similarly great, with the camera having to work overtime to make an episode where the Doctor stands still for 45 minutes tense and thrilling. I have little else to say really. Boom is an easy 10 out of 10, going above Wild Blue Yonder for me, a truly triumphant return for the Moff to Doctor Who, and a genuinely touching and meaningful piece of television that really shows for the first time the true potential of this era beyond the campy fun that we've now seen 3 times in a row with Church on Ruby Road, Space Babies, and The Devil's Chord. Another script penned by Russell T Davies, 73 Yards is a return to his native land for an episode taking inspiration from Welsh folk horror, as the Doctor steps in a fairy circle and Ruby finds herself alone and pursued by a mysterious woman who is always exactly 73 yards away. Whenever someone tries to speak to the woman, they immediately find themselves disgusted or frightened by Ruby and abandon her, from exceptionally mean locals in a Welsh pub all the way to Ruby's own mother, Carla. Ruby lives her life with the woman as a constant presence, becoming involved in politics to find a way to stop Roger ap Gwilliam, aka Mad Jack, a Welsh politician that the Doctor had previously warned Ruby about, whose political stance seems to be, "Oh God, just let me fire one nuclear weapon, please. I beg you, I'll be a good boy. Just let me have the one, please." Truly incisive political commentary. Ruby uses the woman as a weapon against Mad Jack, standing 73 yards away from him, so as to cause him to run away and resign as Prime Minister, ending his political career and nuclear ambitions. Ruby's life goes on, still haunted by the woman, until she and the woman finally touch 65 years after the day the Doctor disappeared. Only for Ruby to find herself back at that day. She was the woman, and she warns her younger self and the Doctor not to step in the circle before disappearing forever. I have to comment that 73 yards is an excellent horror concept. Whenever I am personally walking alone, especially at night, I can get paranoid that someone might be following me without my knowing, and so this episode really spoke to that fear and elicited a discomfort that Doctor Who almost never does. The concept of everyone you know abandoning you except for a strange figure who is always busting it down at a constant distance is haunting, and it speaks to the universal human fear of isolation. In that aspect, I think the episode is incredibly strong at provoking those feelings in a way that reminds me of when I was a child watching Blink for the first time. 73 Yards is obviously an episode that explores Ruby's fear of abandonment, as the elder Ruby even says, "Everyone has abandoned me my whole life." The trauma of being left on a church doorstep unwanted by her mother clearly still deeply affects Ruby, and this episode directly shows that through its usage of the woman. Ruby is haunted by a figure that causes people to leave her, her baggage and her trauma inescapable, and yet simultaneously feeling unlovable. People she loves, people she reaches out to for help, all leave her behind as soon as they come into contact with it. This message does get slightly muddled once the Doctor Who aspect of it comes into it. What was Ruby saying to people that made them run away? Was Mad Jack a bad Welshman because he resigned, or was that from a timeline where he fired the nuclear weapons? Why was there a fairy circle in 2024 foretelling of his arrival? Is he cosmically important? All of these questions are things you may be wondering as the credits roll, and I think they are why this kind of episode doesn't fully grasp me in the way something like Boom does. But that's through no fault of its own, it's just the expectations of the show conflicting with a bold new concept for an episode. In addition, I alluded to it before, but for an episode that was proudly featured in a trailer for the season with big bold letters spelling politics, the political aspect is ridiculously lacking. The Albion Party is a clear imitation of modern far-right parties like Reform UK or the Irish Freedom Party, but instead of using Roger ap Gwilliam's significant screen time to more directly skewer those ideas, he just faffs on about really want to fire a nuclear weapon like a Sean Connery-era Bond villain, and also he's a rapist. This episode was obviously meant to focus on Ruby as a character, and we will get to that, but this was an opportunity to deliver some real commentary that is wasted, and it leaves Roger ap Gwilliam feeling like a bit of a nothing as a result. This is the most dangerous Prime Minister in history, a guy who just really wants to launch a nuclear weapon? I expected more. As well as all of that, I feel like by the end of this episode, we as an audience have learned nothing new about Ruby, which would be fine 4 episodes into a 13-episode season, but we are now halfway through Season 1, and Ruby spent a chunk of Boom unconscious while the Doctor just wasn't in this one. An episode that isolates the companion from the Doctor for its runtime necessitates good character work for said companion. As an audience, we already knew Donna by the time Turn Left came around in Series 4, but even if you hadn't, that episode gives you such a clear picture of who Donna is, warts and all, feeling like a real glimpse into a person's life had they not met the Doctor. But Ruby has so little by way of character at this point that it leaves this episode kind of flat, which is a real shame. All of that aside, as it's more of an issue with the series as a whole than the episode itself, I give 73 Yards a 7 out of 10, putting it above the Church on Ruby Road but below the giggle. 73 Yards delivers on the creativity that one always wishes for from Doctor Who, with an episode that is truly like no other. But it is tragically held back by Ruby's lack of development as a character up to this point. This episode could have been a chance to alleviate that by showing us more of Ruby's depth as a character, but maybe this is just as deep as it goes. Let's find out if it gets better. When initially viewing the synopses for the episodes of this season before they aired, I will be the first to admit that Dot and Bubble was barely on my radar. An episode with a significantly reduced role for Ruby and the Doctor that marketed itself on the evils of social media seemed like a recipe for disaster when written by a man in his 60s. But with that said, I came out of Dot and Bubble shocked to find that it had become one of my favourite episodes of the season. Taking us away from the Doctor and Ruby, Dot and Bubble focuses on a young woman, Lindy Pepperbean, who lives in the world of Fine Time, where everything is fine all the time. Residents of Fine Time are completely reliant on the bubble, a projection of social media that is constantly in front of their faces. It tells them where to walk, what to do, and allows them to talk to each other, and as a result they are completely helpless without it. The insidious nature of Fine Time is something that I'll admit I did not notice at first, but one that for many people will seem obvious from the beginning. The one simple question that unravels the assertion that everything is fine here. Why is everyone white? In reality, of course, it turns out that the residents of Fine Time are spoiled rich children, benefiting from nepotism to stay in a world where they work 2 hours a day and spend the rest of the time partying. And naturally, as in any society that benefits exclusively the wealthy, bigotry is the norm. The ending scene where the survivors of Fine Time refuse the Doctor's help and travel off to certain death simply because of his skin color is genuinely harrowing. The complete breakdown we see the Doctor experience at the thought that these people just won't allow him to save them is incredibly acted by Ncuti Gatwa and forces the viewer to reflect on their experience of the episode. By giving us Lindy as a companion surrogate alongside Ricky September as a Doctor surrogate, we feel as if we know these characters based on the silhouette of their roles in the episode, and the episode twists our own assumptions against us, turning the format of the show itself against the viewer. I say us here, but of course to viewers of colour the inequality of Fine Time is far more obvious than to pasty-faced white boys like myself. It's an interesting choice to have the Doctor actively face racism, especially when one compares it to the previous era, which tended to dance around the 13th Doctor's status as a woman and never really showed the consequences of historical misogyny outside of The Witchfinders, which was a more comedic episode. This twist is masterfully implemented, and the performances that support it are more than capable of leaving the viewer both shocked and appalled. There is of course also the running comparisons through the episode between the bubble and modern social media, with the bubble essentially just being social media that is in front of your face at all times. The episode, however, does not take the old man yells at cloud approach, and instead seeks to discuss the kinds of things that people unthinkingly put online, the hate, the abuse, the harassment, and shows us a machine that sees all of that all of the time and grows to hate the people that propagate it, creating the man traps and directing Fine Time's residents to walk directly into their jaws. This is of course an idea that twins both with Wild Blue Yonder, with the Not Things being driven mad by signals that were sent into space, and later in this season Rogue, which features another group of aliens drawn to Earth by broadcast signals. The repetition of this theme through the season and into Season 2 shows us that the examination of what we as people choose to create and put out into the world, or indeed the universe, is an idea that Russell T Davies is actively trying to explore. An idea about the power of television, the power of media, which itself ties into the themes of The Devil's Chord with the power of music, and Season 2's Lux with the power of cinema. It's a compelling theme and clearly a major preoccupation for Davies. Unsurprising considering his status as a showrunner in his 60s, an accomplished writer outside of Doctor Who was brought back to the show after 15 years to captain a sinking ship. Another major theme of Dot and Bubble is the individualism, the isolation even, of the modern age, seen best through the character of Lindy Pepperbean. The astute viewer might pick up on this on a first viewing, but especially on a repeat watch it sticks out that Lindy relates every event happening around her directly to herself. When she first meets Ricky September, her idol, she declares it the best day of her life, to which a befuddled Ricky reminds her that thousands of people are being eaten alive.
The worst day of my life, but maybe it's the best.
There's still thousands of people being eaten alive.
Yeah, but
When it is discovered that the dots and the man-traps are killing people in alphabetical order, Lindy only remarks that the man-traps are getting closer to killing her, not even sparing a second to consider the thousands that have already been murdered. Even in the episode's opening scenes as Lindy walks to work, we see the bubble direct her to walk around a corpse but not acknowledging it. Lindy lives in the world of Fine Time, but like all of its other residents, she is not a part of it. She lives in her own bubble, unaware and uncaring for the world around her. In conclusion, while going into Dot and Bubble it could seem like a tacky and vapid criticism of modern times, what is revealed is instead a memorable and highly effective story of the inherent bigotry behind systems that reward wealth and the individualism of the world of today. For these reasons, I give Dot and Bubble an 8 out of 10, and controversially I would rank it above 73 Yards and The Giggle, but below Wild Blue Yonder. This choice may seem strange at first, given the reputation of 73 Yards as a masterpiece, but where I had a couple of substantial issues with 73 Yards, in particular with the flatness of Ruby as a character, I find Dot and Bubble to be an extremely effective implementation of a couple of very resonant themes, along with Lindy being a very compelling protagonist, and one that rewards viewers on a rewatch as they notice the signs they might have missed on a first viewing of her true nature. Written by Kate Herron and Brian E. Redmond, best known for their work on Marvel's Loki, Rogue is an episode whose closest Doctor Who kin is probably 2006's The Girl in the Fireplace, a whirlwind romance for the Doctor that ultimately must end in tragedy. Set at a Bridgerton-inspired Regency-era ball, the episode focuses on the Doctor's encounter with the titular bounty hunter Rogue, who mistakes the Doctor for one of the murderous shapeshifters that he's hunting. Rogue is very obviously a piece of television that wants to explore television's impact on people, the power of broadcast media, similar to Wild Blue Yonder and Dot and Bubble, as the Chulder, the aforementioned murderous shapeshifters, are revealed to have intercepted human television signals and come to Earth to act out their very own Bridgerton story, with all of the scandal and drama that entails. I have never seen Bridgerton, so I cannot comment on how successful the Chulder's attempts end up being, but aesthetically they seem to be pretty spot on. The Chulder are here to experience the melodrama and scandal that one associates with period pieces like Pride and Prejudice and Bridgerton, and so they use the human bodies that they steal to get into affairs, plot and scheme, creating higher and higher levels of scandal, and it is in this way that they are ultimately defeated, as the Doctor and Rogue, in the culmination of their romance, perform the ultimate scandal of this era, two men dancing, arguing, and ultimately a proposal. The drama is so palpable that the Chulder cannot resist following them and revealing themselves, leading to their destruction. In this way, the episode is in conversation with itself. As a whirlwind romance, it is beholden to the drama and passion that the Chulder are seeking to emulate, simultaneously mocking and engaging with those ideas. As television, it is the exact sort of broadcast media that causes the Chulder to arrive in the first place. This theme of the power of television is something that continues to run through the Ncuti Gatwa era as an undercurrent, and we will definitely be seeing it again. In addition, a whirlwind romance episode like this is inherently going to be judged on the strength of its performances, something that is thankfully not an issue for this episode, as the chemistry between Ncuti Gatwa and Jonathan Groff is incredibly natural, and their performances are strong enough to capitalize on that chemistry and deliver the first full queer romance for the Doctor in Doctor Who history. I'm sorry, Phasmin doesn't count. The scene where Rogue has the Doctor aboard his ship and the Doctor won't stop taking the piss out of him by playing Kylie Minogue on his speakers is just really nice, fun, energetic television to watch. After all, Rogue is cosplaying just as much as the children are, putting on a persona of a brooding, silent bounty hunter to protect himself, even taking his moniker from Dungeons and Dragons. Naturally, as with all Doctor romances, it must end in tragedy, but in this case in such a way that outright tells the Doctor he needs to go and find Rogue wherever he ended up, with the Doctor placing Rogue's ring on his finger in memoriam, all but promising a reunion for the 15th Doctor and Rogue. Director Ben Chesil returns from his work on The Devil's Chord to direct this episode, and once again knocks it out of the park. The sequence of Rogue and the Doctor dancing is beautifully done visually, and combined with the music creates a wonderful scene that almost single-handedly sells the strength of the entire romance. All in all, Rogue is a really nice, simple Monster of the Week episode that delivers exactly the needed chemistry for the core romance to blossom, without leaving the viewer feeling like they've missed, 6 months of the relationship developing. Sorry, I'm still salty about that. Rogue may not be the best example of a Doctor-focused romance in the series, but as it stands as the first full queer Doctor romance, it more than does justice to that position, providing a more than enjoyable and occasionally beautiful piece of television. For these reasons, I'll give Rogue an 8 out of 10, sliding it nicely between Dot and Bubble and the Giggle. Side note before we move on, when Rogue scans the Doctor and it shows all of his previous faces, I don't know about you guys, but while I wasn't expecting Richard E. Grant's Schalke Doctor to show up, it did not surprise me in the least to see him in the lineup. It's exactly the kind of gets people talking shock that Russell T loves to give the audience, for better and worse. And so, without further ado, we now find ourselves headed into the season finale. We have now arrived at the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for, the review of Season 1's finale, The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death. If you skipped here using the chapters in the description, shame on you. Go back and watch the Dot and Bubble section. Do it. I'll wait. For the sake of simplicity, I've grouped both episodes into the same section, as they are both two parts of the same finale, and it doesn't feel right to review them as if they are wholly separate. I'll still provide separate scores and places in the ranking for both episodes though, because consistency is the enemy. Going into this finale we have many questions. Who is Ruby's mother? Why did the memory of that night change? Who is the mysterious woman played by Susan Twist who appears everywhere? Who is Mrs. Flood and why does she know about TARDISes? Why is the TARDIS crashing so much and making odd noises? Who is the Meep's boss and are they the same person as Rogue's mysterious new boss? Who is the one who waits, and are they the same as the oldest one that Maestro warned of? The Legend of Ruby Sunday is naturally mostly set up for part 2 of the finale, with the Doctor looking for the truth behind a mysterious woman who appears everywhere he goes, played by Susan Twist, who has featured as this woman in every episode since Wild Blue Yonder except The Giggle. When he and Ruby land back on Earth in 2024, they find that she is a tech mogul called Susan Triad, who apparently plans on giving away her tech for free in a big speech today. Her company, S-Triad Technologies, is brought under the Doctor's suspicion as S-Triad is an anagram of TARDIS, while Ruby points out that the Doctor's granddaughter's name was Susan, and this might be her. The Doctor and Ruby decide to go see Susan Triad to uncover the truth, but not before trying to resolve the issue of Ruby's mother, the snow, and the changing memories. Unit put a VHS tape of the CCTV footage into a time window, which creates a 3D projection of a moment in time. Back in Ruby's flat, Mrs. Flood, who is taking care of Cherry for the moment, suddenly begins to speak strangely and declares that he waits no more, which I'm sure means everything is fine. As they view Christmas Eve 2004, Carol of the Bells can be heard, the song that was in Ruby's heart back in The Devil's Chord. Interestingly, as they watch the memory of the Doctor's TARDIS becomes more and more solid, as if the memory of a time machine is feeding on the time window to become real. As they try to discover what the woman is pointing at, one of Unit's soldiers is turned to sand, leading the Doctor to finally resolve to go and see Susan Triad. A roiling mass consumes the remembered TARDIS, and Unit decides to scan the real TARDIS to see if said mass is also there in the present, discovering a life form wrapped around the time machine. As Susan Triad gives a speech, she hears a voice and begins talking about visions, while back in Unit HQ, a woman called Harriet starts chanting a prayer to the gods of chaos, revealing her name as Harriet Arbinger, declaring herself Harbinger for the mother and father and other of all the gods, the one who waits, Sutekh the Destroyer. The life-form surrounding the TARDIS reveals itself as Sutekh himself, now mutated into a jackal-like form, while Susan Triad's face becomes a skull and brings Sutek's dust of death to everyone around her. Ruby, back in the time window, calls out to her mother and walks closer to her as a blizzard appears. Irrespective of my thoughts on Empire of Death, I cannot deny how immensely hype Legend of Ruby Sunday was to me on broadcast, and largely still is now. Even knowing as I always have that Russell T Davies struggles when it comes to delivering finales, it was impossible not to get swept up in this episode's breakneck pace and mystery. Which is to say that as a part 1 of a finale, this is very well put together, laying out clearly what conflicts are going to be resolved going into part 2. I was also shocked that Doctor Who Twitter users' seemingly random suggestion that Sutekh, a one-off villain from 1975's Pyramids of Mars, would be the villain for the season turned out to be true. I do recall that there was some criticism on broadcast of how Susan Triad Technologies being a way of hiding the words Su-Tech, and the TARDIS connection being a red herring, was very silly and didn't really make sense, which is true. But when you put it in context with other Russell T Davies teases, you realize that it's no worse than Mr. Saxon being an anagram of Master Number 6, an extremely specific way of spelling an extremely specific phrase. The Legend of Ruby Sunday also contains a slight nod to the running theme of the power of televisual media through the usage of Ruby's VHS tape of the CCTV footage from the night she was abandoned, as not only the thing that powers the time window, but also the key that ultimately reveals Sutekh as the villain. Obviously, there's far too much going on already to really dwell on that theme for very long, but it's still an interesting point that I feel is worth keeping in mind. Overall, there's not really much to say about Legend of Ruby Sunday on its own. It's a good opener to a finale, but that's really all it is. It's just there to get you hyped for what's coming next. And what comes next is, let's just get to it. The Doctor, Mel, by the way, Mel is here too, and Ruby flee through the time window's memory of a TARDIS, which turns out to be a patchwork of all the TARDISes the Doctor has ever had, and also the setting of the Tales of the TARDIS BBC spin-off. But not before Sutekh explains his entire plan. So, it turns out Sutekh latched onto the Doctor's TARDIS to escape his original fate of being banished through time, and has been hiding there ever since 1975. Feeding on the time vortex and eventually going through the same apotheosis as the Toymaker and becoming a god, in this case, the god of death. He reveals that the Susan Twists are angels of death that were created every time the Doctor landed somewhere, and now every place the Doctor has visited since his 4th incarnation is dying, accompanied by a truly horrifying visual of planets being consumed as the Doctor screams. The Doctor and Ruby watch Pyramids of Mars on the Time Window's iPad, before it flicks to an interview with Roger Ap Gwilliam, the same one from 73 Yards, but now, instead of yearning for nuclear destruction, he's announcing his intention to make DNA testing mandatory throughout the UK, creating a database that the Doctor can use to find Ruby's mother, because as it turns out, the reason Sutekh has finally begun his plan after so long waiting is because he couldn't see Ruby's mother's face. The mystique of the one thing in the entire universe he cannot know is driving him insane, so he has killed the entire universe in order to spur the Doctor into finding an answer to the one question that he cannot comprehend. They go to the Department of Health in 2046 and Mel betrays them, having been psychically tormented by Sutekh, I guess. Sutekh summons the trio back to him and the Doctor puts his plan into motion. He leashes Sutekh with the intelligent rope from the remembered TARDIS, and using the intelligent gloves drags Sutekh behind the TARDIS through the time vortex, bringing death to death and restoring life throughout the universe. The Doctor once again brings death by sending Sutekh back into the vortex, killing him. The universe is restored and it is finally time for Ruby's mother to be found, an ordinary woman named Louise Miller, who wasn't actually pointing at the doctor, but at the signpost behind him, which said Ruby Road, naming her child. The night of Ruby's birth only became muddled and important because Sutek and the doctor invested so much importance into the mystery of who Ruby's mother was. Ruby meets her mother for the first time and shares a goodbye with the doctor, as she needs time away from him now that her family has grown. He promises to return, and the episode ends on Mrs. Flood delivering a sinister message to the audience about how the doctor's story will end in absolute terror. So the running theme of this finale is the idea that the Doctor brings death wherever he goes. He states in Legend of Ruby Sunday that he's never gone back to see Susan because he believes that he brings disaster wherever he goes.
Okay, the grandchild exists, and you've got the TARDIS, but you've never gone back to see her. Why not?
You see my life. I bring disaster, Kate. Disaster.
Even in Church on Ruby Road, he muses that maybe he is the bad luck that happens to undeserving people. Of course, in this episode, he completes that circle by bringing death to death itself, literally by returning life to the universe, but also by having to kill the god of death to do it. There's no playing a game to banish Sutek temporarily like the Toymaker or Maestro. He has to be killed for the universe to live. This theme is nothing new for Doctor Who. Nearly all of the post-revival Doctors have had moments of doubt where they attempt to reckon with the negative consequences of their actions, and here we see that made literal, as the very act of the Doctor travelling is what has brought death to these worlds. His very presence has killed them. While some may consider this particular well to have gone dry in terms of storytelling, I think that this finale displays a tasteful and effective way to reuse the theme without it feeling like treading the same ground as so many Doctors before. The theme of family is left hanging with a clear intention to continue into next season, as while Ruby's familial struggles may have abated, there is still the matter of Susan. The Doctor left her behind all those years ago, ostensibly to protect her from his influence, but there is an obvious loose end left in him not resolving to go and find her, one that could perhaps be resolved next season. Or not at all, but I digress. The idea of the Doctor's family is something that the revival has occasionally lightly touched on, but is now being explored to a much greater degree with the new angle being taken of the Doctor as a foundling, never knowing any biological parents. Susan in particular is a character that I think fans always yearn to see back again, because as the Doctor's granddaughter, she shares a relationship with him that literally no other character can have. She is the only concrete link we have to the Doctor's family on Gallifrey, as well as her being a Time Lord, meaning that she can be recast and brought back at pretty much any moment. Back to Ruby, though, who is now finally reunited with her biological mother, and as we leave her, is setting out to find her biological father. As a result of all these life changes, she and the Doctor must part briefly, but not before sharing a uniquely transparent moment of platonic love, and promising to see each other once again. And I suppose now is as good a time as ever to talk about Ruby Sunday herself. Ruby's mother is an ordinary woman, which is fine, no issues there. However, we are told that Ruby's mother, who was dressed like she was on her way to her local necromancers conference, was actually dramatically pointing not at the Doctor, but at the signpost saying Ruby Road as a way to name her baby. No one was around in this scene except the Doctor, and it doesn't seem like he's stuck around to let the priest know the baby's got a name. Also, even if there were others around, dramatic pointing is not a typical way of naming one's child. All of this is a minor nitpick, but it's one that unavoidably sticks out in your mind when watching the episode. I can accept to a certain degree the snow and the song being a side effect of Sutek and the Doctor investing too much importance in that night. But the actual truth, which is supposed to show us that Ruby's mother is just an ordinary person, is stranger and nonsensical. All of this is nothing, though, when compared with the larger problem with Ruby Sunday, her complete lack of character. Before I start on my tirade, Millie Gibson is great as Ruby. She does more than her best with the material she's given, and none of my issues with Ruby's character are in any way down to her performance. With that said, Ruby Sunday has one personality trait. I was abandoned by my ma. That is it. We briefly get the nugget that she's a musician in Church on Ruby Road, which beyond an admittedly beautiful scene in The Devil's Chord, does not come up again. Hell, in 73 Yards, the episode that Ruby spends entirely on her own, we don't even see her friends from Church on Ruby Road at all. Beyond that, in the 6 episodes of the series not including the finale, Ruby is separated from the Doctor somehow for 4 of them: unconscious in Boom, doctorless in 73 Yards, barely present in Dot and Bubble, and she leaves the Doctor and Rogue to their love affair in Rogue. This is fairly typical of Doctor Who episodes, except usually when the companion is separated from the Doctor, they end up contributing to the episode through their actions, usually by taking charge of a situation or by investigating some oddity that leads to a darker truth. But the only one of those 4 episodes where one cannot deny that Ruby contributes meaningfully is 73 Yards, which is a bad sign given that's the only episode with no Doctor in it. Ruby's relationship with the Doctor in the odd times they are together is smooth and frictionless, like a shark's skin. It's so giggly and frictionless that it harkens back to the relationship between the 10th Doctor and Rose Tyler in Series 2. But where Rose Tyler had an entire season prior to that showed us her troubles, her 2000s angst, to give her depth as a character, which ultimately carried into the happy-go-lucky love affair of Series 2, which itself had a tragic ending, this season is Ruby's first outing as a companion, and a conflict-free relationship with the Doctor leaves her feeling flat and generic. What made Donna, Amy, and Clara beloved companions was their willingness to go against the Doctor when they felt he was wrong, a willingness to go off-book and act in unpredictable but understandable ways, while this season, Ruby and the Doctor have no real disagreements, no fights. Obviously, not every companion can be Donna, Sarah Jane, or Clara, but that doesn't mean we need to do such a disservice to the characters as to not even try and give them something deeper than a one-line summary. And all of this is an issue without even mentioning that we don't have a getting to know you stage of the relationship as a result of the 6-month time skip that puts us in the situation of following 2 characters who know each other much better than we know them, ultimately creating a disconnect between the protagonists and the audience that hangs over the rest of the season. In short, this finale is a disappointing end to what was an overall promising series. While Legend of Ruby Sunday provided solid build-up to an exciting climax, the lack of development given to our main characters, the far too many side characters in the form of the entire unit crew, Donna's daughter Rose and Mel, as well as the overall strange pacing of Empire of Death, an episode where we take a break from the whole universe dying problem to watch Pyramids of Mars on an iPad, not to mention the explanations that don't really stand up to any level of scrutiny, all of that puts this in the classic Russell T Davies finale tier of okay, I guess. Not offensively bad, but a dull end to an enjoyable ride. I give Legend of Ruby Sunday a 6, putting it below Church on Ruby Road and above The Devil's Chord, and I give Empire of Death a 5, sadly placing it at the bottom of our ranking, and leaving us with an average score for this season of 7, which captures how I feel about this series. While Ncuti Gatwa's first season provides us with strong individual episodes, the strength of those episodes is made despite the overall issues that plague the season and ultimately come to a head in the finale, leading to a season that is less than the sum of its parts. Each episode can be fun on their own, but as a single unit there is no cohesion to tie them together at all. As well as that, while this season may be a marked step up from the previous era's output, it fails to reach the lofty heights of the previous Stephen Moffat era, but also in large part due to the 8-episode limit not giving us any time to breathe, it fails to reach the par of Russell T Davies' first showrunning adventures. And with that said, we have finally come to the end of this review of Doctor Who Season 1, or Series 14, or Season 40, whichever you prefer. All in all, Season 1 is a pretty solid season of Doctor Who. The individual episodes are quite strong on their own, but sadly the finale being a bit of a shambles is inevitably going to sour people on the season as a whole. And I think in particular this season suffers from a possibly unfair level of metatextual expectation placed upon it. The first Russell T Davies era of the show is beloved, with many modern fans fondly remembering David Tennant as their first Doctor, and 13 years of absence only serves to further rose-tint those memories. meaning that the expectation for this season to be something akin to Series 4 was always going to hamper it on its eventual arrival. With that said, I would not blame anyone for disliking this season. As we've discussed, it has its flaws. Even beyond the lackluster finale, very basic things like the dynamics of the main characters are mishandled in a way that feels out of step with the companions of previous Russell T Davies seasons. And I think that's it. I've said all I really have to say. As always, if you liked the video, like, subscribe, all that jazz. I would apologize for the length of the video, but frankly, the Season 2 video is likely going to be even longer, so I'll save my apologies for then. Better to ask forgiveness than permission and all that. Anyway, thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.